Hello everyone, DJ here. This week I'm going to cover a topic from one of our viewers. This topic is the mandatory removal date, or MRD, for officers. This is not a topic with which I have had to deal on a regular basis. I had to do a great deal of research on the topic as a result. I believe I should be able to answer the question that was posed to me and describe the basics of the MRD in an understandable manner, though. There's a similar rule on the enlisted side. In the Army, it's called the retention control point. I will cover that topic in a separate episode at a later date. The mandatory removal date is set by federal law rather than by the regulations of each branch of service. For this reason, and unlike the way it manages enlisted service, the branch of service is not able to determine the requirements for separation of its officers to a great degree. This is one of the reasons the officer management branches of each service have more difficult rules they must follow as opposed to their enlisted management branches. Each of the statements I'm about to make, please be aware, for the limits of officer service are backed up by federal law. Be careful, though, not to take anything I say as a hard rule. You will notice that I use the word may a lot in this description. As a warrant officer once said to me, there's a waiver for everything, at least up to a point. Let's take a look at each type of officer and discuss the specifics of each. However, I will not be covering in this episode the rules for officers who are passed over for promotion to the next grade. I will only be talking about the MRD. Commissioned officers. Commissioned officers are limited to a certain number of years of commissioned service before they must be separated. Prior enlisted service, let me say that with a little more enunciation. Prior enlisted service is not a factor here. For officers in the grade of 05 and below, that's Lieutenant Colonel if you're Army, Air Force, or Marine, and Lieutenant Commander if you're Navy or Coast Guard, they are allowed to serve 28 years of commissioned service. Separation is required once the officer reaches this limit, unless the officer is on a promotion list to the grade of 06. For 06s, the limit is 30 years of commissioned service. With these limits in mind, it's kind of understandable why career officers have such concern on being promotable to the next grade. Whether they stay in the service and continue their career depends on it. General or flag officers have their own rules for limitations on commissioned service. 07s may not have more than 30 years of service. 08s may have no more than 35 years of commissioned service, or 5 years time in grade, whichever is later. 09s have 38 years of service, and 010s may have no more than 40 years of commissioned service. There are exceptions, remember that warrant officer I mentioned, to these limits for officers in certain positions, and I will describe those in just a moment. For right now, let's go to warrant officers. As with many things, warrant officer rules are quite different from those of commissioned officers. The years of service requirements are much simpler in their case. Warrant officers may serve up to 30 years, and with the approval of their branch, up to age 62. That would mean beyond 30 years in some cases. The Navy has a special rule limiting their senior warrants, specifically those in the grade of W5, to 33 years of warrant officer service. Commissioned and warrant, whatever. Oh, let me back that out. Of warrant officer service only. Now let's get to some of those exceptions I mentioned. These are exceptions for adjutants general in the National Guard, 09s, 010s, academy professors, professional officers, chaplains. There's a whole slew of them. The needs of the service allow for officers in positions which are harder to fill to serve for longer than those of other positions. Officers in professions such as the medical field and chaplains are allowed to serve up to the age of 68 if their branch of service concurs. Officers serving in permanent professor positions at the service academies may serve until the age of 64. In the case of 09s and 010s, they may serve up to age 66 if authorized by the Secretary of Defense, and up to the age of 68 if authorized by the President. There is a special exemption for officers serving as Adjutant General or Assistant Adjutant General of a state's National Guard. In this case, they are not subject to the rules of commissioned service. Mandatory retirement in the case of age, however, is still a factor. In this case, officers serving as the Adjutant General of a state must retire at the end of the month in which that officer turns 66 years of age. Now let's actually get to the question that started this episode in the first place. A few weeks ago, one of the viewers of the YouTube channel posted a question in the comments about a case he is working. This viewer is a new retirement services officer in the National Guard. He is working with an active Guard/Reserve, or AGR, officer who has reached 28 years of commissioned service. This officer is an 05 and is not on the promotion list to 06. I will use the officer's actual last name and will post some documents about him in the references. For the sake of privacy, these references will not display his full name, unit of assignment, or the state in which he serves. Those are all going to be redacted. So Lieutenant Colonel, or LTC, Adams has over 16 years of active duty service. He commissioned as a second lieutenant in August of 1989. This means he will hit his mandatory removal date next month. The question from the viewer was whether he will be able to retire as an active duty service member or as a reservist. The answer to this question turns out to be quite simple. Since Lieutenant Colonel Adams does not have 20 years of active federal service, or AFS, he will not be able to retire as an active duty service member and will not receive an immediate pension. Excuse me for the hiccups there. Colonel Adams will retire as a reservist and should be transferred to the retired reserve until he reaches his retired pay eligibility date, or RPED. On a happier note, Lieutenant Colonel Adams is eligible for reduced retirement age, so he will be able to receive a pension prior to age 60. I'm posting his retirement points and an estimate of his retired pay and how much extra he will receive as a result of that reduced retirement age. Like I said, all information about him except for rank and last name have been redacted. As you will see, he had a considerable amount of service, read that as a lot of retirement points, and will have a reasonable amount of retired pay as a result. Now here's what some of you might be thinking. What about the Temporary Early Retirement Authority, or TERA? Can that help this officer retire since he has more than 15 years of active service? Well, the current rules for the Temporary Early Retirement Authority only allow for this early type of retirement when an active duty member is removed from active service as a result of one of the many retention boards we have. In cases such as these, members with at least 15 but less than 20 active duty years may request retirement under TERA. Since Lieutenant Colonel Adams is not being removed by one of these boards, he will not be eligible to request retirement under TERA. I am also going to post the current TERA rules in the references for your own education. Well, that was rapid fire. Now that I've filled your heads with all this information, I hope it was understandable, by the way. I believe it's time to call it quits for the day. If you have any questions or comments about what I've mentioned today, please post them in the comments section. If you believe this information would be useful to someone you know, please share this episode with them. As always, I encourage you to share my YouTube channel and website with other reservists and family members that you may know. By the way, just for fun, I'm going to also post a brochure I found which gives some highlights about reserve retirement back in 1952. Take a look at that and see how things have changed over the years. You can check the bottom of the references section for that link. Please join me next week. I will be talking about another benefits-related topic for you. Thank you for joining me today, and as always, thank you for your service.